Okay, so you're here because you want to get smart fast and you want to cut through all that noise out there,
Yeah.
right? You want just the essentials. And today we're going to be looking at something that I know is a big concern for a lot of educators out there.
Yeah.
And that is
Hmm.
how to deliver quality learning when you are facing a classroom that is absolutely packed with students.
It's a challenge, and I think a lot of people kind of assume that it's a roadblock to good education, right? That, oh, if you have too many students in a class, then by definition, you can't do a good job.
Right.
But we have a really fantastic resource that we're going to be digging into today, and it's a UNESCO guide called Practical Tips for Teaching Large Classes.
Perfect.
And as you can tell from the title, it's really all about giving teachers actionable strategies to make large classes work.
Yeah, and I love how this guide really flips that assumption on its head. It's
Yeah.
like instead of saying, okay, well, a large class is a problem,
Right.
let her look at it as a dynamic environment that might have its own unique possibilities.
Yeah.
And actually use that to our advantage and really kind of move towards student-centered and engaging approaches.
Yeah, and this guide kind of smartly, I think, breaks it down into three key areas that we're going to explore with you today.
Okay.
The first one is really all about, how do you even set up a classroom? How do you create a learning space, both physically, but also that psychosocial environment that is so important?
Right.
And then, assuming you've got that, how do you actually teach? What are the most effective ways to teach when you're in this large class setting?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, how do you evaluate? How do you actually know what's working? How do you evaluate student progress, but also your own teaching when you have so many students that you're trying to keep track of?
Yeah, and I think that first section is so important to start with,
Yeah.
that creating a well-managed learning environment.
Mm-hmm.
Because I could just imagine stepping into a classroom for the first time
It's a teacher.
as a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just wall-to-wall students.
Yeah.
And you just think, how am I going to manage them all?
Yeah, and I think that's such a fundamental question, and this guide really kind of smartly starts with that physical space.
Right.
Because, that's something that you as the teacher do have a lot of control over, and the guide really emphasizes flexibility and keeping the focus on the students.
Okay.
So, for example, it suggests, reconsidering the traditional teacher's desk,
Right.
because often that just takes up so much space,
It really does.
and it's not really being used that effectively.
Right.
And instead thinking about how can we design a space that encourages interaction and different kinds of activities.
Right. And they talk about using things like mats or rugs
Oh, yeah.
for seating. And that immediately changes the dynamic, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
It kind of hints at more fluid kind of group work.
Yeah.
And I was struck by the example they give from Bangladesh where they talk about classrooms using these large carpeted areas
Oh, wow.
that can be adapted
Oh, that's cool.
for different activities. So it could be like, a science experiment zone 1 minute and then like a little drama corner the next,
That's amazing.
and it's all very flexible
I love that.
and adaptable.
Yeah.
And it's not just about where the students sit.
Right.
The guide also highlights the value of having multiple chalkboards,
Oh, interesting.
but at the student's height.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So you can imagine all the possibilities there for them to do, group problem solving or brainstorming.
Everyone can be up at the board at the same time.
Everyone can be up at the board
Yeah.
at the same time.
That's brilliant.
So it's a really nice way of maximizing participation.
I like that a lot.
And then it moves on to kind of the more practicalities of storage, which I imagine in a large classroom must be a constant kind of juggling act
Oh, yeah.
of where to put things.
Mm.
And the guide emphasizes accessibility,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that things that you use frequently are very easy to get to. And then, being a little bit ruthless maybe with those things that you don't use so often and storing them outside of the classroom if you have limited space.
It's about being strategic
Yeah.
with what you've got.
Absolutely. And then it talks about something that you might not immediately consider, and that is student movement.
Oh, interesting.
How do students enter and exit the classroom? How do you transition between different activities?
Mhm.
And the guide actually suggests planning for these routines,
Oh, wow.
having a system like back to front exit strategy
Okay.
so that it minimizes disruption and there's a nice smooth flow, even though you've got lots of people.
Makes a lot of sense.
And it even goes down to those little things that you might not think about,
Mhm.
like handing out papers
Right.
or, what to do if a student needs to sharpen a pencil.
Right.
Like having a system for all those things so that they don't snowball into bigger disruptions.
It's like setting up those classroom procedures ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's a really nice section where it talks about thinking outside the box, literally,
Oh,
and using the school grounds as a learning resource.
Oh, I like that.
So, taking a math lesson outside to explore geometric shapes in the schoolyard.
Oh, I love that.
It's just really nice to think about the possibilities of learning not being confined to
Mhm.
four walls.
Absolutely.
And then it also talks about displaying student work. And I thought this was really interesting because obviously space is at a premium
Yeah.
in a large classroom. So the guide kind of offers some quite clever solutions, like using strings and clips to hang work on walls, or even outside the classroom door.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So it's saving space, but it's also showcasing those student achievements and making it a more welcoming environment.
I like that too.
And the other thing that I really liked about that section is this underlying principle of student ownership.
Hmm.
So it's involving students in the management of that physical space,
Oh, yeah.
whether it's putting up their work or even suggesting ways to organize materials.
Right.
And that really helps to foster that sense of responsibility and pride in their environment.
It's their classroom too.
Exactly. It's their classroom too. And it even goes down to things like student comfort and actually suggesting that teachers should involve students in decisions about the layout of the classroom.
Oh, wow.
So, asking for their ideas, maybe through drawings, and then trying out arrangements based on their feedback.
That's really student-centered.
It's really putting those learners at the heart of the space.
I love that.
And I think that leads us on really nicely to the next kind of crucial element of creating a well-managed environment. And that is the psychosocial environment.
Yeah.
The atmosphere, the feeling in the room. And the guide uses this really lovely phrase that talks about the classroom is a learning community, where you've got a sense of belonging, mutual respect. Everyone feels comfortable to participate and to learn.
Yeah, it's about connection, right?
Yeah.
Making those connections.
And you can imagine in a large class, that can feel like a monumental task.
Yeah, especially at the beginning of the year.
Right. So how do you actually build that community? And the guide has some really smart strategies. It talks about things like making a large class feel smaller through personal touches. So moving around the room, having brief chats with individual students, showing that you're interested in their lives outside of school. And there's this lovely example in the guide of a teacher who made a huge difference just by taking that time to connect with individual students.
It's those little things.
It really is. It's those little things. And I thought this was really interesting. The guide actually suggests temporarily reducing the class size at the very beginning of the year.
Oh, how do they suggest you do that?
Well, you could do something like, have half the class come in the morning and half the class come in the afternoon
Okay.
for the first few days,
I see.
so that you can actually
Yeah.
have those getting to know you activities.
Right.
It might be, learning names. It might be doing some initial assessments, understanding their backgrounds, but it's in a more intimate setting. So you can actually build that foundation of individual recognition.
Right. When you've got like 15 students in front of you instead of 30 or 60, that makes a huge difference.
Exactly. And it makes me think about that point about names.
Right.
Because I know for me personally, if I was stepping into a large classroom,
Right.
learning all those names would feel like an impossible feat.
Yeah, absolutely. And the guide dedicates a good chunk to this because it's so important, right? Because knowing a student's name really does tell them that you see them.
Yeah.
You see them as an individual.
As an individual, yeah.
And it can be so daunting, but there are some really practical techniques.
Yeah.
Things like seating charts, photos of students or drawings with their names on them, name cards, name tags, all of that. I particularly like the suggestion of incorporating the name learning into introductions,
Oh, right.
where, each student has to remember the names of the two students before them.
Oh, that's fun.
So it becomes this interactive game.
Yeah.
And you're building those connections as you're doing it.
Yeah, that's much more engaging
Yeah,
than just kind of reading off a list.
absolutely.
And it also emphasizes the importance of actively taking attendance
Right.
and crucially actually using students' names
Yes.
during the lesson, even if it takes you a while to learn all those names.
Yeah.
Making that effort really shows that you care.
And the guide talks about, different memorization techniques,
Yeah.
Associating names with cues, like, a physical trait or a known interest or something.
Right.
Using those little things to help you remember, and even like creatively using class time, when students have written work in front of them.
Oh, yeah.
Like as a visual reminder to help you kind of remember their names.
Yeah, I thought this was a really clever idea involving class assistants in things like demonstrating an activity.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a way of interacting more closely with a smaller group of students and learning their names.
And a little bit about them.
And a little bit about them as well. And then, of course, that idea of breaking the class down into smaller working groups from the get-go
Right.
naturally makes that name recall more manageable.
Yeah, when you're dealing with, 8 students instead of 60, it's a lot less overwhelming.
Much more manageable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they also detail some nice interactive getting to know you activities.
Oh, yeah.
Like name games and things like fill in the blank forms where you try and find some common interests.
I like that a lot.
And it's all about building that sense of community
Right.
amongst the students themselves as well as between the teacher and the students.
And it's fun.
And it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it also talks about creating these student profiles,
Mm-hmm.
Through questionnaires and things so that you can really understand those factors outside of the classroom.
Right.
That might have an impact on a student's learning. So it might be, family background.
Mm-hmm.
It might be living situation.
Right.
It might be access to resources.
And learning that context.
Yeah, it's really seeing the whole picture,
Yeah.
not just that student in their desk in front of you.
Absolutely.
And then it talks about, the teacher being relatable,
Yeah.
presenting yourself as a person,
Right.
sharing relevant experiences and using humor appropriately.
Not being afraid to, be yourself in the classroom.
Absolutely. And allowing students to express themselves,
Yeah.
particularly in those initial weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Starting maybe with small group discussions as a way to get those quieter students participating
Mhm.
before you move on to bigger group activities.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, actually, about encouraging questions.
Yeah.
Because so many students in large classes are reluctant to speak up.
Absolutely.
So the guide talks about using prompts,
Oh, right.
specific questions or statements that are really designed to encourage a response.
Yeah.
And allowing sufficient wait time
Mm-hmm.
after you've asked a question so that students actually have time to think.
Yeah. Those
Yeah.
few seconds of silence.
Makes such a difference.
They really do.
And also acknowledging that some concepts are difficult
Yeah.
and kind of anticipating where students might struggle and even, sharing your own past difficulties with that material as a way of making it okay
Right.
to not understand. And the guide even suggests keeping a diary
Oh, wow.
of common errors that you notice.
That's a good idea.
So you know what to anticipate and how to tailor your teaching.
Yeah, I like that. And then it emphasizes that very simple, but I think often overlooked act of being available
To students.
to students before and after class
Yeah.
for those one-to-one questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because not every student is going to feel comfortable asking a question
In front of the whole class.
in front of the whole class. And just by being there and being accessible,
Yeah.
you build that trust and you encourage that help-seeking behavior.
Absolutely. And the guide also talks about monitoring individual progress.
Yeah.
Keeping track of attendance, how they're performing on tasks participation,
Mm-hmm.
and using things like diagnostic assessments to figure out who needs a bit of extra help.
Right.
And then maybe, doing some one-to-one check-ins or even running some small group review sessions.
To really target those needs.
It's about being proactive, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
In identifying those needs.
Absolutely.
Now, a well-managed environment also means addressing student behavior.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And the guide has a really good section on establishing those clear and reasonable rules.
Mm-hmm.
And the core idea here is creating that shared understanding
Right.
of expectations.
Yeah, yeah.
So everyone knows what's expected of them, and they talk about this really interesting approach of involving students in that process.
Oh, how do they suggest doing that?
Well, they talk about things like using a rights-based approach, so focusing on respecting everyone's right to learn,
Okay.
and even collaboratively developing a classroom constitution.
I love that.
Yeah, so that the students really feel ownership over those behavioral norms.
If they're a classroom.
Exactly. And also, I think making the rules clear, focusing on specific behaviors and keeping the list short
Yeah.
so that it's not overwhelming.
Right.
Having 3 or 4 key rules that are very clear.
Rather than pages and pages. Rather than pages and pages. And also being really explicit about your expectations for routine things. What happens when you want to speak?
Right.
What happens when you need to move around the classroom?
Yeah.
All of those little things. And then, of course, crucially, choosing rules that you're actually willing and able to enforce consistently.
Yeah. I mean, that's so important.
Yeah.
You can't have rules that you're not prepared to actually follow through on.
Absolutely. And the guide also really strongly advocates for positive discipline strategies as alternatives to those kind of more punitive measures.
So instead of punishing bad behavior, you're trying to encourage good behavior.
Yeah, it's about guiding behavior in a constructive way. And it lists a whole range of positive approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Things like praising good behavior, strategically ignoring minor disruptions,
Mm-hmm.
using nonverbal cues distraction techniques. And I really like the target, stop, do method that they described.
Oh, tell me about that.
It's basically, if you've got a student who's maybe off task, you target their name,
Yeah.
you say their name, then you say stop doing whatever it is they're doing, and then you give them a clear instruction of what they should be doing.
Oh, that's very clear and direct.
Very clear, very direct. And I think in a large class setting,
Yeah,
that clarity is essential.
it is.
And then it also gives some really practical advice for managing your own reactions as a teacher.
Oh, yeah.
When you're faced with challenging behavior. And I think
Yeah.
it's so important to remember that your response as a teacher really sets the tone
Yeah,
for the whole classroom.
absolutely. And we all get frustrated.
We all get frustrated.
Yet it's about, channeling that frustration in a positive way.
Exactly. And then ultimately the guide even goes as far as suggesting empowering students to take a role in managing that psychosocial environment.
Oh, wow.
So things like classroom disciplinary committees or
Yeah.
student management teams.
I like that a lot.
So it's really about giving the students a voice and a role
It's about building that community again, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
and making them part of the solution. And I think that leads us on really nicely to that second key area that the guide addresses,
Right.
teaching effectively in large classes.
How do you actually teach when you've got 60 students staring at you?
Right. And the guide starts with this really nice reflective activity.
Oh, yeah.
It basically asks you to think back to your own experiences as a student
Right.
in large classes and to try and remember those times when maybe you didn't learn as effectively as you could have.
Oh, that's a really good activity.
And it kind of lists some common reasons why that might have been.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the lessons weren't clear, or maybe the teacher lacked a bit of enthusiasm, or the teaching methods were a bit dull, or the examples didn't connect with you, or maybe there wasn't a clear focus on the key points.
It's making you think about what makes good teaching, right?
Yeah, it's really getting you to think about it
Yeah.
from the student's perspective,
Yeah, I love that.
which I think is so important.
Yeah.
And then it moves on to the importance of planning
Right.
and really emphasizes that in a large class setting, careful advanced planning is even more important
Yeah, then maybe in a smaller setting.
than in a smaller setting, because you might have that flexibility in a smaller class to be a bit more spontaneous.
Right.
But large classes really thrive on clear structure.
I think that's true.
And it makes the point that a well-thought-out lesson plan
Mm-hmm.
not only reduces your own anxiety as a teacher,
Oh, yeah, you feel much more prepared.
you feel much more prepared
And confident.
and confident, but it also communicates that confidence and that sense of direction to the students.
Yeah, they know what to expect.
They know what to expect, and it breaks down planning into three main components.
Mm-hmm.
There's the physical and psychosocial environment, which we've already talked about.
Right.
Then there's the content itself,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that the content you're teaching is relevant to the students,
That it's meaningful.
that is meaningful, that they're going to be interested in it. And then the process, which is all about the teaching methods that you're going to use and how you're going to manage your time effectively
Yeah,
and cater to all those different learning styles that you're going to have in a large class.
absolutely. And within those areas, they highlight some really crucial elements of good lesson planning.
Okay.
So first of all, just being thoroughly comfortable with the subject matter yourself.
Right.
Because if you're not confident,
It shows.
it shows.
Yeah.
And then clearly defining your learning objectives and making those transparent to the students.
Right. So they know
So they know what they're supposed to be learning.
what they should be getting out of this lesson.
Exactly. You can even write them on the board.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And then structuring your lesson logically.
Mhm.
So whether that's chronologically or, going step by step or presenting a problem and then the solution.
You need that kind of clear roadmap, don't you,
You do.
before you set off
Yeah.
on this learning journey
Yeah.
with a large group of people.
And it also emphasizes planning your teaching strategies and your
Yeah.
activities in advance.
So it's not just a case of, I'm going to talk at them for an hour.
Right. Exactly.
It's about thinking about those different activities that you can weave in.
Yeah, those little mini lectures followed by an activity and then another mini lecture and another activity.
Much more engaging.
Absolutely. And also thinking about the resources that you're going to need, both the physical materials, but also any human support that you might be able to tap into.
Right.
So is there, a retired teacher or are there older students who you could get to come in and help out as assistants?
That's a really smart way of maximizing the resources that are available to you.
Absolutely. And they remind you to think about the students with individual needs.
Right.
So are there any seating arrangements that need to be considered?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any, extra support materials that
Yeah.
need to be prepared?
And then it all comes together in that formal lesson plan, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Actually writing it down, and they talk about using different formats like outlines or matrices,
Yeah, I like a matrix.
but it's about having that plan and then sticking to it.
And also being mindful of your own time as a teacher.
Yeah.
Because teaching a large class is hard work.
It is hard work,
It takes a lot of time and energy,
and you're going to feel unprepared or rushed.
and that will impact your students.
It will impact your students, yeah.
So, planning is about managing your resources as much as it is about
Yeah,
structuring the learning.
absolutely. Now, once you've got that plan,
Mm-hmm.
the guide moves on to the actual delivery
Right.
of your teaching.
So you've got your plan.
You've got your plan, you're ready to
Mhm.
go. But how you teach is just as critical as what you teach,
Especially with a large audience.
especially with a large audience. And one of the first tips that the guide gives is so simple, but I think so effective, and that is arrive early
Oh,
to
yeah.
the classroom.
Just that simple act.
Just that simple act, rushing in at the last minute can communicate that lack of enthusiasm or preparedness.
Yeah, it makes you look flustered.
It does. And just by being there early,
Mm.
you can set that really positive and organized tone.
Right, you got time to set up.
Yeah, you've got time to set up.
Organize your materials. You can connect with students as they arrive.
Exactly, and create that calmer atmosphere from the outset.
Yeah, I like it.
And then there's this really important idea of the attention getter
Mm-hmm.
at the beginning of a lesson.
Right, you've got to get their attention.
You've got to get their attention.
Especially if you've got a large group.
Exactly. And the guide has some fantastic examples.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Things like posing an intriguing question
Mm.
or sharing a surprising fact that links directly to what you're going to be teaching.
Oh, that's good.
I really like the examples that they gave
Tell me.
about, challenging those gender stereotypes in different professions. And they even had an example about a talking watermelon
A talking watermelon.
to illustrate a point.
Oh, I love that.
It's just about being a bit creative
Mm-hmm.
and finding something that's really going to grab their attention.
Absolutely.
And then it emphasizes the importance of really clearly highlighting key information
Mm-hmm.
and doing this at multiple points throughout the lesson.
Okay.
So doing it at the beginning to
Yeah.
give that overview
Mm-hmm.
during the main points
Huh.
to reinforce that understanding.
Yeah.
And then again at the end to summarize those essential takeaways.
Repetition is key.
Repetition is key
Yeah.
because with a large group, you need to make sure that those points are landing,
Yeah.
for as many students as possible. So it might be announcing what's important,
Mm-hmm.
writing it on the board, rephrasing it in different ways, summarizing it at the end.
Yeah.
It's all about making those key concepts stick.
Yeah. And the guide also talks about using relevant examples.
Right.
Moving beyond those kind of dry textbook definitions
Yeah.
and using examples from the real world.
That students can actually connect with.
Yes.
And they make the point that examples that are anecdotal, personals, relevant to the students' lives, and even humorous,
Yeah.
tend to be the most memorable.
We all remember those teachers who told great stories.
We do, yeah. And then it talks about the importance of considering different learning styles.
Right.
That classic auditory visual kinesthetic.
Yeah.
And actually using a variety of communication methods
Oh, that makes sense.
to cater to those different preferences. So it might
Yeah.
be through discussions, it might be through written assignments, it might be through visual aids, hands-on activities.
Mixing it up.
It's all about mixing it up and providing those different pathways to understanding.
Because not everyone learns in the same way.
Exactly.
And that leads us nicely onto, I think, the third key aspect of teaching effectively, which is using a variety of teaching methods.
Right.
So we've talked about, being prepared.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about getting their attention.
Yeah.
Now, how are you actually going to teach?
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? And the guy really emphasizes that using different approaches increases student attentiveness, but it also maximizes that overall learning potential.
Okay.
And it starts by looking at the lecture, which is often the go-to method, I think, in a large class.
It's kind of the default,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is. And it acknowledges that lecturing has advantages.
Mm.
It's an efficient way to get information across.
Yeah, to a large number of students.
To a large number of students, it allows the teacher to control the flow of information.
Mm.
And it can be a good way to communicate enthusiasm
Yeah.
for a subject.
Yeah, you can really kind of convey your passion
Yeah.
for a topic, can't you?
You can lecture?
But it also points out the significant drawbacks.
Yeah.
It often puts students in a passive role.
Right.
There's limited opportunity for two-way communication or immediate feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and lectures can be so easily forgotten.
Oh, yeah, if they're not reinforced.
They're not reinforced.
Yeah. So if you do choose to lecture, the guide gives some tips
Okay.
for making it more effective.
Let's hear them.
First of all, as we said, being comfortable with your material is really essential.
Yeah, if you know your stuff.
It shows.
Yeah.
And breaking up those long lectures into shorter mini lectures
right.
and then having activities sprinkled in.
So there's that change of pace.
Yeah, to keep them involved.
Keeps them on their toes.
Starting with an engaging question or anecdote.
Yeah.
Providing a clear overview of what you're going to cover
Mm-hmm.
and explaining the relevance of the topic.
Right, why should they care?
Why should they care
Yeah.
about this? And then the delivery itself makes a huge difference.
Right.
So varying your tone of voice,
Mm-hmm.
moving around the classroom.
Yeah.
So you're making eye contact with different students,
Right.
using humor appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things can really help to keep students engaged.
Yeah, and I think that active seeking of feedback
Yeah.
is so important,
Even during a lecture.
even during a lecture.
It might be, just observing their body language
Mhm.
or posing a specific question
Yeah,
just to check for understanding.
check that they're with you.
Yeah.
And then, of course, summarizing those main points at the end and explicitly inviting questions and comments.
Yeah, giving them that opportunity to clarify anything.
And to consolidate their learning.
Absolutely. And then the guide moves on to this, I think, really strong kind of advocacy for active learning. So it's
Right.
about shifting away from that model of students just passively listening
Yeah.